Hey everyone, this is Rosie, and today we're going to make an eco-friendly shopping bag. So let's get started. Here are the materials that you'll need to make the bag. First, I have 2 pieces of nylon webbing that I'll be using for my handles. Each piece is 22 inches long, and I've already seared the ends so that the webbing does not fray. And then I'm using some 100% cotton quilting fabric for the rest of the project. Right here I have a ½ yard of fabric. This will be used for the main bag. And right here I have 2 pieces of fabric that are 7 inches wide by 12 inches high. These pieces will be used to close up the bag. One piece right here does not have any interfacing on it at all. But on the second piece I have fused it with some woven interfacing. Then you'll also need some all-purpose thread, and then you'll need some sort of closure when you decide to fold up the bag. So I'm just using some cam snaps. You can use some Velcro or any other type of closure that you might want to try. First, we'll start by sewing these 2 pieces together. And this is that outer closure that's going to fold and tuck away the bag nicely for you. I'm going to take this outer part right here. This is the part with the fusible woven interfacing on it. And I'm just going to start by drawing some sewing lines on it. Now, this is a little trick that you can do if you're not too confident with sewing a straight line. You can just simply mark them. Now, I am using a friction pen here, and as always, you want to use these with a lot of caution, because while the lines that we're drawing will disappear with heat, they will come back with cold. So I have some sewing lines drawn in there, and now I want to make a shape for my flap. You can use whatever you like for a shape. If you have a favorite pattern with a flap on it, you can use that, or you can just make up your own shape. You can lay a plate down and trace around the plate. I'm just going to take my little 2½ inch circle, and I'm going to go right within these lines that I just drew, and I'm just going to draw a little curve on each side. So now when I sew, it doesn't really matter where I start. I'm going to sew up, and I'll sew right on this curve right here, across, then on the second curve, and down and across. The only thing that you need to do is leave an opening somewhere. So I'm going to leave an opening about that wide, which is about 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4½ inches wide. And that's plenty for this project. You do want to take the other piece, place the 2 pieces right sides together, and clip or pin in place. I have the right sides now clipped together, and I'm going to start sewing on that line that we drew, and I'll start right at the mark where we're going to leave the opening. I'm going to sew with a stitch length of 2.5, and you just want to stay right on the line. Give yourself a little back stitch there. And you want to sew right to where those lines intersect, and then you'll pivot around. And pivot again. Just stay on the line the best you can. And when you get to where the curve is, you just want to go slowly. There's no need to stop and pivot on that curve as long as you're going slow. You can guide it with your hand. Same thing here, you just want to go slowly. The feed dogs are pulling that fabric along and your hand is just gently guiding around that curve. And then just sew right up to that mark where we're leaving the opening. Back stitch and then you're done. Next you'll want to do some trimming, so we're going to clip these corners off to get the bulk out of the way. You want to clip close to your stitching but not through it. You'll do that on both sides. Just be very careful that you don't clip through that seam. And then over here we'll trim around that curve. And then you want to make some little snips where the curves are. So again, you want to go close to your stitching, but certainly not through it. These clips will help us to make a nice curve when we turn everything right sides out. Now we want to press our seams open, so I'm just going to take the iron and fold everything open and give everything a nice press. Now when I get to the curves, I just like to take a point turner and I just sort of get it in between the two layers and then fold back with the point turner and then I press. So you just want to keep going around the entire piece, pressing that seam open. And now that everything is pressed open, I'm going to turn everything right side out. I don't press on both sides, I just press the seam open on one side. And find your opening, and then just turn it inside out this way, or right side out. And then you'll take your point turner and get that in there to help push out those corners. You don't want to press too hard because you don't want to go through your seams, but you want to press hard enough to get that corner nice and square. And then you'll go to the other side, and you can actually use your rounded end of your point turner and just sort of roll it over that seam on the inside. And then once you've finished pushing the seams out with your point turner, you want to go ahead and take your fingers and roll that seam to the outside so that it looks even on both sides. You don't want it to be, you know, rolled to, you don't want that seam to be rolled to one side. You just want to get it very nicely in the center there. And you'll give everything a really nice pressing after that. Everything is nicely pressed and that opening is still open here. Make sure that you press under those seam allowances where the opening is 1/2 of an inch on each side, and then they should come together nicely. Now you want to go over to your sewing machine and sew 1/4 of an inch away from the edge all the way around, and that will actually close up this opening right here. I'm going to do that top stitching, and I actually want to top stitch on the side that has my interfacing. So I'll flip this over, and now you can see I have the interface side on top, and I'm just going to sew 1/4 of an inch all the way around. Doesn't really matter where you start, you could start wherever you like. And I'm going to stay with the stitch length of 2.5. You don't have to backstitch, you can do that when we join the two ends. Same as before, just go slowly around your curves. And now you can backstitch. Now we'll work on the bag. So this was my 1/2 yard piece of fabric. This side is the fold of the fabric and this side was the selvage. I just squared it up, and to square it up I just put it down on my mat and I lined that folded edge up with one of the lines on my mat, and then I took my ruler and I squared up this edge right here, and then I squared up my second edge, and then I just trimmed off the selvage at the top. So I ended up with a nice square piece of fabric which is approximately 21 inches long by 17 3/4 inches wide. And this will be the bottom of the bag where the fold is, and where I cut off the selvage, this will be the top of the bag. Now I'm not using a directional print here, so that works out okay. But if you're using a directional print, you may have to cut your pieces out along the length of the fabric instead of the width of the fabric. To get started here, I want to take my fabric, and this would have been the selvage side right here, and I want to mark 2 lines down from the top, each 1 inch away from the other. So the first line will be 1 inch down, the second line will be 2 inches down from that top. I'll just take my ruler and I'm going to mark it with the friction pen. Now normally I would use a chalk wheel to do this, but this is harder to see on the camera, so I'm using the friction pen just for demonstration. And I want to do this on both sides. So I have the 2 lines here, and then I'll have 2 lines on the other side as well. After you draw the 2 lines, you want to fold them under one at a time and press them. And you'll fold each one under, just like I'm doing here, and press. So that was the first one, and now we'll fold back the second one. Then after those 2 lines are pressed, just fold this one back, and then fold again, and then give everything a nice press, just like this. After the top is all pressed into place, I want you to go to the opposite side where the fold is and mark another line 2 inches up from the bottom. And then once again, you'll go over to your iron, you'll fold back on that line that you just drew, and you'll iron it in place. And you're going to iron it to one side of the bag. It doesn't really matter which side of the bag you're ironing it to, just it's getting ironed to one side of the bag. Let's take a look at what we should have so far. This is the bag we've been working on. This is the bottom of the bag with the folded edge. We turned that folded edge up 2 inches and pressed it down towards one side of the bag. Then at the top, we pressed the raw edges down 1 inch, and then we pressed it down another inch. And we did that on both sides of the bag. Now, we want to take this piece and sew it to one side of the bag. So we're just going to open this up. And I'm going to place this centered on the bag 1 1/4 inches down from the top here. So I'm just going to mark a line 1 1/4 inches down from the folded edge of the top right here. And then I'll place this on the line So the top straight edge is right on the line there. And then we just want to measure the distance in from each side. And just make sure that they're equal. And then I'll just secure it down with some pins. And make sure that you're only pinning to one side of the bag. And then I'm going to turn it around, and I'm going to mark a line 3 inches down from the top of the flap. And now we'll sew this down by starting right here at the top. We're going to stitch right over the same line of top stitching that we created, all the way down to where I drew this line. We'll sew across the line and then back up over the top stitching on the other side. I'm ready to start sewing this down. I did unfold my top edge here just to make sure that I don't catch anything accidentally in my seam. And again, we're just going to go right over that previous row of top stitching. And I'm still on my stitch length of 2.5. And you do want to back tack here. And when you get to where you drew the line, you'll just pivot around. And now that I'm back to that line of top stitching, I'll just pivot again and sew up the other side. Now that we have this piece sewn in right here, we want to open this up because we're going to attach our handles. So I have this folded edge right here. I want to mark in 5 3/4 inches from the edge. And you'll mark this on all 4 sides. And then once you have your marks in, you'll take your handles and you're going to slip them right underneath, right here, right up against that mark. And then you'll just hold it in with a clip. And then you'll do the same thing on the other side, and just make sure that this does not get twisted as you bring it around. And you'll slip it under there again. And you go ahead and do this to both sides, and then we'll sew in the handles. I have my handles clipped into place, and now what I want to do is top stitch right along this folded edge right here. And I will be top stitching 1/4 inch away from the edge with a stitch length of 2.5. You do want to back stitch. And just sew right over where your handle is. And then back stitch again when you get to the opposite side. Now the next thing that you'll do is take your handle right here and you want to fold it up just like this, and then you'll put a little clip in just to hold it in place, and do that on both ends. And now we're going to top stitch from this folded edge, and on this edge I'm going to top stitch 1/8 inch away from the edge. And then just sew right through that webbing. And backstitch at the end. Then the last thing I like to do is I turn everything over and I'm going to draw, or I'm going to sew a little box around that webbing. And this will make it nice and strong. And then I'll just sew across that top one more time. And do a little back stitch. So you want to go ahead and do this to both sides of your bag. We need to sew our side seams together now, and we're going to do that using a French seam. So to do a French seam, you want to start by having your wrong sides clipped together. So here's one side of the bag. You want to unfold the bottom part right here where we ironed that fold up, and you're just going to clip right along the length here. You'll do this to both sides, and then we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're just going to sew 1/4 of an inch all the way down the edge, and we'll do that on both sides of the bag. I'm going to start sewing that side seam. I'll be sewing 1/4 of an inch away from the edge here. I'm starting at the bottom where the fold is. The distance between the edge of my press-a-foot and my needle is approximately 1/4 of an inch. I'm using a stitch length of 2.5, and you do want to backstitch. And then backstitch again when you get to the top. And once you have this side sewn, you want to go ahead and sew the other side exactly the same way. Now that I have those seams sewed in there, I just want to trim them down. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'll just trim maybe about 1/8 of an inch off of there. Could be a little bit less. And you want to do this on both sides. Now that my seams are trimmed down on both sides, I want to take the whole bag and turn it wrong side out. And you can take your point turner and get those edges there to come out nicely. I do like to take it over to the iron and press this seam, and then you'll just roll those seams until they're in the center, and then you'll give it a press. I pressed those seams on both sides, and now we're going to clip these edges together, and we'll be sewing again 1/4 of an inch down the length. The idea here now is you want to be able to encase that seam that we trimmed down to 1/8 of an inch when we sewed from the right side. And over here, where we had folded up before that 2 inches, now you want to fold that up, and we're going to sew that fold into the seam that we're going to create right now. So clip that in place and clip along your length, and then we'll sew this down. Now I'm going to sew up the side of the bag with the same 1/4 of an inch seam, and I'm using a stitch length of 2.5. So I'm starting at the top, and I'm just going to back stitch. When you get to the bottom, you'll be where the fold is, and you just want to sew right over that fold. So here's the fold, and I'm sewing that down in place. And since this is the bottom of the bag, you may want to go over that stitching, so I'll back over it. And I'll go over it again. Now, if you're not confident about back stitching like that, you can just pivot and sew over it this way. And back stitch. The side seams have been sewn and the fold has been stitched into place, and now we're going to turn the bag right side out. You want to poke out your corners here. And this is what it should look like. Just like this. And that gives you a nice flat bottom. And then go over to your iron again and roll your seams so that the seam is in the center. And you should not see any of the first seam that you've sewn in here. If you do see it, then you'll have to take it out, trim back a little bit more on that first seam, and then try sewing it again. So remember, we're trying to encase that first seam inside the second seam, so you should not be able to see it. And that's how you do a French seam. The seams are completed on both sides, and this is what your bottom should look like. And now we're ready to fold it up. So we turn it over and we fold in one side, and you're going to fold in the second side. And then we fold down the top and get your handles nicely tucked into place there. And then you want to take this end and you want to meet it with this top edge right here. Then you'll fold the whole thing in half and fold the flap over. Just like this. And now we're ready to put in the snaps. To put in the cam snaps, you want to find the center of your flap, and I have it right here. So you'll just poke a hole right into the center there. Make sure that you don't poke yourself. And then you want to take your cam snaps. So here's what the cam snaps look like. You have pieces that look like a cap that have a very pointy tip on them, and then you have two more pieces. One is a female piece and the other one is the male piece. So first we're going to put the male piece onto our pouch. So we're going to take one of the caps with the pointy ends, and we'll take the male piece right here. and you'll take the point on the cap and put it through the hole that we just created with the point. Make sure that point comes all the way through, and then you'll take the male piece and you'll put it on that point. Then you want to take your tool, this is the setter for the cam snaps, and you want to set the cap into the bottom part right here. So you'll get that in place. Make sure that the cap is sitting inside of this black well right here, and make sure that this top part is over the male part, and then you just want to squeeze. This is what it should look like from the side. Just want to squeeze it nice and hard, and then when you take it off, that pointy part has been compressed, and that's what's holding that in place. That's what's holding the male part in place there. Now we need to decide where to put the female part of the snap. And what I normally do is I'll take this, fold it over, and I'll press down really hard. And then the male side of the snap will leave a little bit of impression on your fabric. Now you can't see it on camera, but I'm just going to poke a little hole where the center of that snap landed. And then I'm going to take one of the caps and I'm going to put it on the inside and poke it through the hole, just like that. And then I'll take the female piece and I'll put that on that pointy post there. And then you'll do the exact same thing. You're going to seat the cap into the black well right there. You'll get everything lined up, and then you'll press. So there you go. You have a very nice and useful little project that's great for gift giving, and it's small enough to fit into most handbags. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and I give a sincere thank you to everyone who's already supported my channel by subscribing. And if you haven't already done so, I'd love to have you as a subscriber, so please like and subscribe.